Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, an adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire Frisbee from the Children's Room.
And we are back with another conversation. Now, when you last left you, we were deep in Hindu mythology. We were waist deep in Hindu mythology. Yes, a very exciting topic, very different than like Western viewpoint on things. It's a big, complicated mythology, like almost everything we discuss.
Okay.
It's coming from a non-Western viewpoint, so you have all that going for it. Now, there's several like big myths that run through Hindu mythology, but the big one that I want to talk about is the Ramayana, or Ramayana, as people pronounce it who may actually know how to speak other languages. It's the story of the great hero Rama. He is like the hero of Hindu mythology. He's their Hercules, their King Arthur. He's the guy that does it all.
Okay.
This is his life story. It is one of the most popular stories in the world, everywhere except the Western culture. It's been made into like movies, television shows, comic books, anime. It's just it really gets around. There's originally an oral story, so no one knows exactly how old it is, but it was first written down in Sanskrit around 400 BC. So it is significantly old.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
You mentioned anime. Are there any that we would maybe recognize?
Probably not. Most of them came from India that don't have a lot of popularity outside of Southeast Asia. So the crux of the story has remained pretty much unchanged in every different version. The details are altered in some different versions. So I'm going with the most basic version of the story I can find. Okay, Rama is our hero. He had a magical birth, like many heroes we've already encountered. Not as magical as some, but there's a king and a queen actually a king and 3 wives. And all of his wives were barren. He had no children, so he was very upset, so he prayed to the gods to have a child. And so magically, his first wife got pregnant, and then his other 2 wives also got pregnant. The firstborn child they called Rama. So he considered to be a blessing from the gods. And when he was born, the very first thing they noticed was that he had blue skin. Now that is very significant in Hindu culture. Blue represents the sky, represents infinity and like limitless potential. So right away they knew this Rama kid was going to go places in his life. And then he had 5 or 6 other like half siblings from the different wives that the king had married. Now the other thing about Rama that I think we mentioned last time is he's also an incarnation of Vishnu. So he's both his own person and avatar of Vishnu at the same time. So Vishnu generally incarnates himself on Earth for a reason. And he had a pretty important reason this time. So going back in history, there is a demon known as Ravana. Now Ravana is an evil demon. He's the king of all demons according to some of the stories. So in their way of looking at things, if you do great austerities to the gods, if you go without sleep and go without food and so forth and things like that, for long in a period of time, the gods will recognize your piousness and they'll feel compelled to reward you. So this Ravana, despite being a demon, did pious actions for 10,000 years. He spent a long time. This is a long game he's playing here. So for 10,000 years, he did all these great austerities to the gods until finally Brahma, the lead god, recognized him and granted him a wish, or a boon. And so what he wished was to be invulnerable to gods or demons. And so Brahma granted him that wish. So not surprisingly, now that Ravana, the demon king, was pretty much invulnerable, he went on a rampage. He just started raping, killing, stealing, burning things. He was unstoppable. So the rest of the gods began to get kind of upset. So,
But only kind of.
yeah. Well, so they went to Brahma and they asked, how could you do this? And so Brahma points out there is a loophole. He can't be harmed by other demons or by any of the gods, but he can be harmed by a man, or let's say a monkey. If it was the right man and the right monkey, he could be brought low. Now, Ravana is often called a demon. Now, I like the translation where he's called a Rakshasa, because Rakshasas are very cool. They're monsters that are mostly found in Dungeons and Dragons these days.
Oh.
They're wicked shapeshifters and magicians and so forth like that. And I only know about them because when I was a young child, back in the 1970s, there was a TV series called Kolchak the Night Stalker. It was a predecessor to X-Files, and every week poor Carl Kolchak, a reporter for a tabloid newspaper, would stumble across some monster that only he could defeat. And he happened to go after a shape-shifting demon one time called the Rakshasa. And as a kid, I had never heard that word before, so I had to look it up in a paper dictionary, the Encyclopedia Britannica, to find out what a Rakshasa was. So by learning about Rakshasas, I learned about the story of Rama. So I've known the Ramayana story since I was in high school. So I've always thought it was very cool. So, all right, so Rama, he's destined for greatness. He is specifically born to kill Ravana. He doesn't actually know that yet. So he does the things that most heroes do. He wanders around, he kills monsters, he liberates people from evil tyrants, defeats bandits, that kind of thing. Now, during his wanderings, he comes across the most beautiful woman on the earth, and that is Sita. Sita's name is the same word as the furrow in the earth that you make when you're planting seeds and things like that. So she represents the earth itself. She's kind of a Mother Earth figure. Incredibly beautiful, indescribably wonderful in every possible way. She's as much a archetypical heroine as he is an archetypical hero. So naturally they fall for each other immediately. She's a princess because of course she's a princess. So he goes for her father the king and tries to get her hand in marriage. But of course it's not that easy. He has a test. He has this giant bow that belonged to the gods. I think it was left behind the last time the gods had a huge war against somebody. It's the bow that belonged to Shiva. And it's so massive that it can only be carried around in an iron chariot pulled by 8 strong men. And he says, only the person who can string this bow can marry my daughter. And so Rama happens to be the greatest archer in the world. He's never seen a bow that he couldn't tame, so he decided to try it. So he has to grab the bow and bend it down and get the bowstring and pull it up and tie it off and so forth, and he succeeds. And then, just to show off, he wants to shoot an arrow to show his accuracy, so he pulls out an arrow and starts to shoot it. But he pulls so hard on the string, the wooden bow snaps. He actually breaks the bow of Shiva. So needless to say, Sita's father is really impressed with this. He not only strung the bow, he actually broke it with his strength. So obviously Rama is no ordinary man. So he gives his blessing, and Sita goes away with Rama back to his father, the king. And the king is overjoyed, and he wants to step down from the throne and make Rama the new king, along with his bride as the queen, and they will rule over the land. But it's not that easy, because it never is. One of his wives, who wasn't Rama's mother, was named Kayakyi. Now, Kayakyi was very jealous that the other wife had given birth to Rama, and that her son was going to rule instead of Kayakyi's son. She thought that her son Bharata would make a much better king. Now, it happened that a while ago, when the king had a fever, she had nursed him and brought him back to health. And at that time, he had offered her a boon. And so now she comes to him and she lays claim to what she wants. She demands that Rama be banished for 14 years and that her son be named the successor to the throne. And the king is like, well, this is wrong, but what can I do? It's a matter of honor. I owe it to her. So already twice in the story, debts of honor have cropped up. Because this is one of those stories they tell to kids to teach them things that are important in life. Just as we saw the same things in the fairy stories in England and so forth and so on, in some ways they're morality tales. Even though they're mostly about a hero who slays monsters. So the king has no choice but to exile his favorite son from his land and his bride-to-be and put Bharata as the next king. So, dutiful son that he is, Rama and Sita both leave. They go off into the jungle by themselves. Actually, Rama's brother comes with him, but that's a different story.
So he peacefully leaves.
They peacefully leave, yes.
And prior to the leaving, the other wife, did she have reason to believe that her son should be the favorite?
No, she just wanted to get ahead. But it was tragic, of course, because the king was so heartbroken about losing Rama that he died. So upon his death, Bharata becomes king. The problem is by this time, he's figured out what his mother did, and he's not happy. So he goes running out and he finds Rama, throws himself to the ground at Rama's feet, and says, I do not deserve to be king, you do, please come back and rule over our land. And Rama says, I can't. I have sworn to my father before he died that I would leave the land for 14 years. I am banished, and I cannot return until my time is up. So Bharata has to go back and rule over the country that he no longer wants to rule. and Rama and his brother and Sita are left out there in the jungle. So they have a whole series of adventures. There's a whole cycle of stories about him fighting various monsters and so forth and demons. There's a beautiful demoness who's a shapeshifter, because all these demons are shapeshifters. She tries to seduce Rama away from Sita, but of course his heart is pure. He will not, pay attention to her. So she's jealous and angry. She goes back to her brother, who happens to be Ravana, the king of demons. Now she knows if she can get rid of Sita, she can have Rama all for herself. So she talks up how gorgeous Sita is to her evil brother, who's the invulnerable demon king. So Ravana comes down, and sure enough, Sita is all that and more. So he has to have her. So he takes one of his demon minions and changes him into a golden deer and lures away Rama and his brother out into the woods to chase him down. And while Sita is alone, he comes along and whisks her away. He takes her across the subcontinent to his island kingdom of Lanka, which we today know as Sri Lanka. In those days, Lanka was the home of demons. It was where the demon king lived. So Rama is naturally very upset about this.
Okay, but
Yeah.
we jumped to Rama. How about Sita? Is that her name?
Sita's the wife, yes.
And how does she
She's
feel
taken
about
away.
all this?
Well, she's very upset too.
She's been kidnapped.
Yes, but she mostly doesn't figure this part of the story, because it's all Rama's story, how he gets her back.
Okay.
The gist of the story is how he gets her back. So yes, she dropped off jewelry into the trees as she was going by, which was found by a bunch of monkeys. And so Rama goes to the monkey people to find what path that she was taken. And while talking to the monkey people, who should he run into but Hanuman, the monkey king. Now, he is not exactly the same character we saw in Chinese mythology. This Hanuman is much more serious and sober than the previous version of him that we saw. Some fans say that that they're reincarnations of the same monkey spirit, and some say that this is the original Monkey King coming back to Earth after achieving enlightenment and becoming a living Buddha. But in any event, he's the Monkey King back again.
Okay.
I told you he pops up in more than one mythology. Now there's civil war going on amongst the monkeys, and so Rama has to take a hand in that. And once he's settled that down, Hanuman agrees to help him get Sita back. But by that time, it's monsoon season. So they have torrents of rain coming down, everything is flooded, rivers are swollen, no one can travel anywhere. So he's stuck with the monkeys until the weather clears. Then they go out and they fight their way across India, heading towards the shore where the island of Lanka is. They had to figure out some way to get there without getting killed by Ravana and his army of demons. So what Hanuman decides is there's no bridge to get there. There's no way to reach the island easily. So what Hanuman does is he summons all of his monkeys from all across India, and they all grab their arms and their tails, and they form a living chain of monkeys going all the way from India to Sri Lanka. Yeah. And then Rama runs across that with his armor and his weapons and everything. And I just love that image of all these monkeys.
Ants do that though.
Yeah, ants can do that. So why not? Why not talking monkeys? So he gets there and huge fight. He takes on Ravana. Ravana's casting spells, and Rama is shooting his arrows, and Hanuman jumps into the fight, and it goes back and forth, and eventually Ravana is defeated. He is killed, and Rama is triumphant. So,
but by the Monkey King though, right?
He's killed by both of them together.
Okay.
It took both of them to do it.
Okay.
So it looks like a happy ending, but it's not over yet. Because he's reunited with Sita, but instead of immediately embracing her and whisking her away, they all travel back to his kingdom. And he has this big gathering in front of all of his people. And they're all happy that he's back and Sita's back and everything. But he looks at Sita and says, I had to rescue you because it was a matter of honor. But unfortunately, as you've lived in the house of another man for a year, I can't take you as my wife. Therefore, I have to bid you farewell. Yeah. The look on Sita's face is about like yours. Oh yeah. He's another male hero who goes through a huge adventure just to pull a jerk-ass move with a woman. Yeah. So, Sita does not take this well. Needless to say. So she's like, all right, you, build a fire. And they build this, huge fire. And she's going to say that, I'm going to prove my purity and my honesty, because I'm going to dive into these flames, and if I am telling you the truth that I have not been touched by him, then the flames will not harm me. And she does it. She dives into the flames. And Agni, the god of fire, sees this going on. So he swoops down and he picks her out of the fire and plops her down next to Rama and basically tells Rama, yo, dude, chill, she's okay. Which sounds better in Sanskrit. So they are reunited. There's another version of the story in which after being reunited, the people still like turn on her and don't trust her. And so she winds up giving birth to twins and then going out and becoming one with the earth and vanishing back into the ground again. So yeah, she's got completely written out of the ending of what should be her story in a really terrible way. The way in which they explain this is the entire story, as you've noticed, is about the honor system in those days.
Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Because she had gone away for a year, not of her own volition. She was then considered tainted and impure, and he could not bring himself to marry her until she was tested by jumping into a funeral pyre, which an average woman, of course, in real life can't do. Yeah. And in some versions of it, Rama immediately says, "Oh, sweetie, I didn't want to do that, but the people were suspicious of you. This crowd, didn't believe you. So to prove it to them, I had to set up this whole elaborate test. I always knew you were faithful to me." And she's like, "Yeah, right, buddy." Yeah.
I'm a little angry.
It could have had a better ending. Yeah, it really could have. But he is unfortunately held up as a paragon of virtue, of manly virtues.
I'm not even surprised, though.
Yeah, it's sad. We see this again and again in so many different cultures. It just never goes away, the misogyny. But the theme of this story is basically honor. Even Brahma, the king of all the gods, is honor-bound to make Ravana invulnerable when Ravana does all the right things he needs to do to win Brahma's favor. He has no choice but to do it. So from their point of view, Rama had no choice but to deny Sita, even though he still loved her. And in some versions, even though he still believed her, he still had to deny her. But an honor system that treats women that badly, or treats anyone that badly, is not a good one in the long run.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, for modern audiences, they try to soften it a little bit, but it's really hard. It's really hard to change that ending too much. As I said, in some of them, she gives birth to twins, and then just says, "I'm out of here," and walks away, and vanishes back into the earth where she came from.
Does that allude to suicide?
No, she was magically born from the ground, and she magically went back to it again. Does it seem to be a suicide thing?
Could be taken that way.
It could be. The jumping into the fire is clearly a reference to funeral pyres, and the fact that widows in India would be set on fire when their husbands died. Yeah.
Are we still talking mythology?
In
or?
real life, sadly. It was quite common when a husband died for the widow to be immolated in his funeral pyre. Yeah.
I had heard of that before. I did not believe that it was real.
It did happen. How frequently it happened, we don't know. A lot of what we know about that period of Indian history is filtered through British imperialism, and it was in the British's best interest to make the Indians look as bad as possible, so they'd be helpless savages who needed the guiding hand of the white people.
Yeah.
So it may have been exaggerated. There's a famous scene in Around the World in 80 Days where Phileas Fogg takes time out of his round-the-world trip to rescue a widow from a funeral pyre, and takes her with him and later marries her back in England. So it was considered important enough that Jules Verne included it in one of his books. So.
Interesting.
Well, we'll be leaving India behind and moving on across the Indian Ocean next week as we continue our study of world mythology. How are you liking it so far? Is it?
I've enjoyed every bit of it.
There's a lot of rough stuff out there and a lot of different viewpoints, ways of looking at the world.
Absolutely.
So until next time, I have been Ed.
Solitaire.
And we'll see you next time on Conversations. Until then, be safe.